She got into my car crying, but it wasn't just any crying. It felt like each tear came from a weight she'd been carrying for years. At first, she didn't say where she wanted to go, just asked me to drive. Minutes later, she started talking about her life, about cold nights on the streets and decisions she never wanted to make. I just listened, until something in the story changed. She started saying things that sounded too personal. Things about me. Details I'd never shared with a passenger. And then she said something that made my stomach turn. "You're not like your brother." I'd never told anyone about him. Ever. How did she know? If you enjoy real-life stories that mess with your head and make you wonder what can happen inside a car, leave a like and subscribe to Backseat Secrets. I guarantee the end of this race will surprise you, so stay with me until the end. My name is Ryan Carter. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I've been driving for a ride-hailing app for almost 5 years. It's not the kind of job you plan when you're a kid, but life has a strange way of putting you where you need to be. That night, I was just finishing up my rides. The clock was almost midnight, and the winter chill was fogging up the car windows. I was thinking about heading home when my phone vibrated with a new call. The distance wasn't far, but the location gave me pause. It was near an area where I rarely pick up passengers. The streets were dimly lit, the few shops were open, and the silence seemed to be even the engine seemed to respect. I accepted the ride more out of habit than desire. I drove for a few minutes and saw, in the distance, the silhouette of a woman standing on the sidewalk. Shoulders hunched, hands on her face. As I approached, she quickly wiped away her tears, as if to hide the fact that she had been crying. He opened the backseat door and got in without looking at me. The air inside the car seemed to change. She said only 2 words in a low, trembling tone, "Just drive." I glanced in the rearview mirror. The dim light from the streetlights barely illuminated her face, but I could see she was pale, her eyes red. I pressed the start button and began following the fastest route. The silence was almost suffocating, and for a moment I thought maybe she just wanted peace. But something about that heavy presence told me this wouldn't be just another race. As the car drove through the nearly deserted streets, I noticed her constantly glancing outside, as if expecting someone to follow her. Her fingers drummed nervously on her knee, and every now and then she pulled her coat higher, as if trying to hide. The destination shown on the app was an old hotel downtown, but she didn't seem in a hurry. On the contrary, at every turn, I noticed her scanning the surroundings, as if calculating escape routes. I decided to break the silence with a simple question, just to ease the tension. I asked if everything was okay. It took her a few seconds to answer, saying she'd just gotten out of a difficult situation but didn't want to go into details. Her voice still had that shaky tone, but there was something underneath, something that sounded more than sadness. Then, out of the blue, she called me by my name. Not the one that appears on the app, but my full name. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I don't use my full name with clients, nor do I let it appear on my profile. She noticed my reaction in the rearview mirror and just smiled slightly, as if she knew exactly what effect she was having. My first reaction was to try to find a logical explanation. Maybe she recognized me from somewhere, or saw my name on social media. But as I drove, I realized the information she was giving was too specific. She mentioned the street where I grew up, talked about the color of the bicycle I had as a child, and even mentioned the dog my family had for years. With each sentence, my breathing grew heavier. I began to wonder if a friend had set up a prank, but there was nothing funny about the way she spoke. It wasn't mocking, it was as if she were simply remembering. I tried to steer the subject in a different direction, asking if she'd ever lived in Denver. She said no, but that she'd known someone very close to me. Then she dropped another bombshell. She said she knew about my complicated relationship with my older brother, something almost no one knows. I couldn't understand how this could have reached her. For the next few blocks, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't just tense, it was suffocating. I knew that, somehow, she was preparing to say something even more profound. The hotel was already showing up on the GPS, less than 5 minutes away, when she took a deep breath and finally said what she'd seemed to be holding back since she'd walked in. She glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting my eyes for a second, and spoke with disturbing calm, "I met your brother." My entire body went rigid. She wasn't speaking like someone who'd heard vague stories or read something. She spoke like someone who remembered every detail. Before I could respond, she added, "He was my client, right before he died." I couldn't say anything. I just felt the steering wheel grow heavier in my hands and a lump forming in my throat. She began to tell me that, during the few times they'd met, he'd talked about me a lot. He'd talked about our fights, about how different we were, but also about the good things we shared. She said he regretted not having reached out to me in the last months of his life. I was driving, but I wasn't paying attention to the road anymore. My mind was flooded with old memories, good and bad, all coming at once. I tried to maintain control, but my thoughts were racing. I hadn't spoken about my brother in years, and now a stranger was there in the back seat, bringing back memories I'd buried under lock and key. I asked how exactly she met him. She said she worked in a remote neighborhood and that he'd come by a few times, always alone. She said that, unlike most, he wasn't just looking for the service she offered. He wanted to talk. Sometimes they spent more time talking than anything else. She remembered stories about our childhood, about a dog named Max who chased children on the street, and even about the old red bicycle he claimed had been mine. As she spoke, pain mixed with a strange sense of reconnection began to consume me. For a moment, it felt like I was hearing my brother again, through her voice. That's when I asked why she was telling me all this. She took a deep breath, looked out the window, and said she thought I deserved to know. That, even though his life had taken a difficult turn, he genuinely cared for me. That he regretted not trying to rebuild our relationship. It affected me more than I could admit. For a moment, I forgot she was still a stranger. It was as if she'd brought with her a piece of him I thought I'd lost forever. When the car stopped in front of the hotel, she looked at me and said that maybe one day we'd meet again. She calmly left, disappearing through the revolving door, leaving a heavy yet comforting silence in the air. I stood in front of the hotel for a few seconds, my hands still on the steering wheel, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The clock read 12:14 a.m., but I felt as if I'd aged years during that drive. The yellowish light from the exterior reflected off the car's hood, and I simply couldn't get the engine to start. It was strange to think that for all these years, I had tried to bury every memory of my brother. When he died, we left behind more unspoken words than anything we could have resolved. We weren't raised to talk about feelings. We fought, drifted apart, spoke again, and the cycle repeated until, suddenly, there was no more time. And now, a complete stranger, with tears in her eyes and stories I never knew existed, has given me back pieces of him. Imperfect, confusing, but real pieces. Things I never would have discovered on my own. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her there, as if she'd changed her mind and come back. But she was gone. Just the revolving door, moving slowly to a stop. I turned the car back on and began driving aimlessly. The sound of the engine filled the silence, but my mind was miles away. I remembered how my brother pushed me on my first bike, the day we tried to fix the garage roof and ended up destroying half the tiles, and the time he lent me money without ever asking for it back. Little things that, at the time, seemed trivial, but now carried enormous weight. Maybe that race was just a coincidence. Maybe she'd made it all up. Or maybe it was the universe's way of giving me one last conversation with him, even if it was through someone else. When I finally parked in front of my house, it was already past 1 a.m., but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep anytime soon. Some rides end like this, not when the passenger leaves, but when something inside you changes. I never saw that woman again. I never learned her real name, nor why she decided to reveal that part of my story. But what she told me that night stayed with me. Not just the words, but the feeling that, somehow, my brother was still there, watching me in the rearview mirror. If you've made it this far, I want you to tell me in the comments. Do you think she was telling the truth, or was someone just messing with my head? And since you're here, leave a like and subscribe to Backseat Secrets, because in the next video, the story I'm going to tell might make you rethink who you let into your car.